There is a moment in the emergency room that I will never forget. Not when the doctor told me my left lung had collapsed 40%. Not when they wheeled me into the operating room. But the moment I heard my mother's voice come through the speakerphone, calm, cold, as someone reading a grocery list telling the doctor, "Call us back if things get worse. We have guests coming tonight." I had 800 milliliters of blood in my chest cavity. And my mother was worried about the dinner table. Dr. Kelsey stood completely still, phone still in her hand, not saying a word. I watched a nurse in the doorway turn away. No one looked at me, and I lay there, IV line in my arm, morphine blurring everything at the edges, every breath like someone cutting from the inside, and I thought, oh, so this is what it feels like to die alone. 21 hours later, I woke up in the ICU. I looked at the chair beside my bed, the chair where someone who loves you sits for hours with cold coffee and worried eyes. Empty. I looked at the visitor log at the foot of the bed. My name at the top. Below it, blank lines. Not a single signature. No one came. Not one person. But that's not even the worst part of what I'm about to tell you. My name is Claire Harmon. I'm 31 years old. On the morning of November 27th, 2025 Thanksgiving, I was driving south on Interstate 5 from Seattle toward Olympia, when a delivery truck ran a red light and hit the driver's side of my car at full speed. 3 broken ribs. A punctured left lung. Internal bleeding that required 4 hours and 12 minutes of emergency surgery to repair. The trauma team at Tacoma Regional Medical Center called my parents from the emergency contact card in my wallet. The attending physician, Dr. Yvonne Kelsey, put them on speaker from the nurse's station so I could hear. Through the morphine, I heard her voice. Precise. Urgent. Your daughter is in critical condition. She needs emergency surgery in the next hour. Can you come? My mother's voice came through that phone like cold water over stone. We have 17 people arriving tonight for dinner, she said. Call us if things get worse. There was a pause on the line. A long one. I heard a nurse in the doorway turn away. And I thought, with absolute clarity, so this is what dying alone feels like. 21 hours later, I woke up in the ICU. The surgery was done. The room was empty. No coats draped over the chair by the window. No half-empty coffee cups. No visitor badges. No voice. No evidence that anyone had been there at any point in those 21 hours. Just the machines beeping and a woman standing at the foot of my bed in business casual clothing, holding a small wooden box tied with brown twine. She introduced herself as a patient accounts coordinator. Someone paid your bill in full this morning, she said quietly. A man, silver hair, dark coat. He wouldn't give his name. He left this for you and said not to open it until you were home. I looked at the box. Dark walnut wood, smooth, heavier than I expected for its size. There was a small card tucked under the string, handwritten in blue ink. Don't open this until you're home. You were never alone. F. I did not know who F was. Not yet. But what I would find inside that box would prove that for 16 years, someone had been watching over me, in the only way he was permitted to, in secret, in silence. From a distance my father had measured out in closed doors, and certified letters signed for, and never passed along. And it would prove that my own parents had spent those same 16 years making sure I believed I had been forgotten. Before I go further, I want to tell you something. I almost didn't say any of this out loud. Part of me, the part that became a nurse, the part trained to look for the kindest possible explanation, kept wanting to believe my parents had made a mistake. That it was a misunderstanding compounded by stubbornness, not a pattern built on intention. I've been sitting with this for months, and the reason I'm finally ready to tell it is because of a 7-year-old boy named Milo. But I'll get there. I'm a registered nurse in the pediatric emergency department at Cascade Children's Hospital in Seattle. I've worked there for 4 years. Night shifts, mostly 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., the hours when the hospital goes quiet and the families go home and the children who remain are the ones too sick or too alone to rest. Some nights I have 3 patients. Some nights I have 7. And on the nights when a child's parents can't be there when someone has to work, or has another child at home, or simply isn't there, I stay close. I read aloud. I hold hands. I make sure no one wakes up screaming into an empty room. I've been doing it for 4 years. I'm good at it. And I think, if I'm honest, I became this kind of nurse because I knew exactly what it felt like to be that child. My family lives in Olympia, 90 minutes south of Seattle on a clear day. My parents, Richard and Diane Harmon, are 59 and 57, married 33 years. My younger sister, Brooke, is 26. She works in brand strategy at a tech company downtown, lives in a gorgeous condo in Capitol Hill, and has been, for as long as I can recall, the daughter my parents understood. Brooke got engaged at 24. Brooke got promoted at 25. Brooke moved in the right direction, made the right moves, had the right kind of ambition. I went into nursing, which my father once described at the dinner table, while smiling as a fine career for people without bigger plans. He said it the way people say things they've already decided are true. I know how this sounds. I know the story of the overlooked child is not a new story. But what happened was not just favoritism, it was a pattern. And patterns have roots. When I was 14, I came home from school bent double with right side pain, so sharp I could barely walk. I told my mother something was wrong. She told me I was being dramatic. 6 hours later, my appendix ruptured. Emergency surgery at midnight. When my parents got to the hospital, my father's first words were, "Why didn't you tell us how serious it was?" I had told them. I was 14 years old, and I had told them exactly what I felt. When I was 19, a migraine hit me so hard I couldn't see straight, vomiting. Light burning my eyes, the room tilting. I called my mother from my dorm. She told me to take Tylenol and go to bed. I drove myself to urgent care. IV fluids, anti-nausea medication, a $340 bill I paid from my campus job savings, and never mentioned to my parents again. When I was 23, a stress fracture in my foot from training. I called my dad. He told me my sister had run a full marathon without a single complaint. I went to the appointment alone and wore a boot for 6 weeks. By my mid-20s, I had completely stopped telling my family when I was hurt, because every time I did, they found a way to make it my fault. So when Dr. Kelsey called on Thanksgiving morning and told my mother I had nearly 800 milliliters of blood in my chest cavity, my mother had spent 17 years training herself to hear that as exaggeration, and there was something else. Something I hadn't let myself think about clearly in a long time. My grandfather, my father's father, Frank Harmon, had been a steady, warm presence in my life until I turned 13. He came to every school play, every soccer game. He sat with me on the porch swing in summer and let me hold his gold watch and Omega with a worn leather strap that had been his father's and his grandfather's before that, and he would say, "See that second hand, Claire? It never stops. Just like love. Just keeps going, steady and true, no matter what." And then when I was 13, he stopped coming. My father said he'd overstepped a boundary, that he wasn't welcome anymore. I thought maybe I had done something wrong. I thought, as children do when adults can't be blamed, that maybe Grandpa Frank had simply moved on. Maybe he had a new life. Maybe he had forgotten me. That thought settled into me quietly over the years, the way a splinter you stop noticing still leaves a scar. I accepted it. I didn't have any other choice. I was wrong. The morning of November 27th, I left my apartment in Capitol Hill at 11:20 a.m. Thanksgiving traffic on I-5 heading south was already building. I told myself, as I merged onto the highway, that this year would be different. That maybe my mother would ask about my work. That maybe my father would say something that didn't feel like a comparison. That maybe I would sit at the table and feel, for once, like I actually belonged there. I had been telling myself that story every Thanksgiving for 6 years. It was the story that kept getting me back in the car. At 1:15 p.m., just south of the Federal Way exit, a delivery truck blew through a red light. I saw it in my peripheral vision, big, fast, no time. I hit the brakes. It didn't matter. The impact was direct. Driver's side, full speed. The airbag went off. Glass across my lap and my arms. And then the pain stabbing, immediate, worse with every breath. I couldn't move my left arm properly. I couldn't get a full breath. I heard a state trooper's voice above me, telling me to stay still, telling me the ambulance was coming. And the last thing I saw clearly before I lost consciousness was my phone lighting up on the passenger seat. A text from my mother. "Don't forget the cranberry sauce. You always forget something." Then everything went dark. I want to pause here, because I've told this story a few times in private, and every time I get to that text message, people ask me if that's the moment I broke. It wasn't. It was so close to what I had come to expect that it barely registered. If you have ever carried someone's disappointment for so long that you stopped being surprised by it, if you have ever arrived at a moment that should have destroyed you and found yourself thinking, "Yes, this is about what I expected," then you understand. The breaking came later. It always comes later. I woke up in the ICU on Friday afternoon. Dr. Kelsey explained what had been repaired, the lung, the internal bleeding, the ribs, and what to expect in the coming days. She was kind, thorough, professional. I asked about my family. She was quiet for a moment before she answered. She said, "We reached your emergency contact." I looked at the visitor log at the foot of my bed, a printed form with my name at the top and blank lines below it. I looked at the chair beside the bed, the one where the people who love you sit for hours with cold coffee and phone chargers, and the helpless energy of someone trying to make something better by staying close. Empty. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Brooke, asking about the cranberry sauce. A text from my mother the next morning. I guess you weren't coming. We saved you a plate. I put the phone face down on the mattress. I stared at the water stain. And I thought, they really didn't come. That was when the billing coordinator walked in. She placed the wooden box on my tray table, told me about the man in the dark coat, silver-haired, quiet, came in Thursday evening, paid the full bill $109,780 by bank check. Left no name. Left this, and said to wait until I was home to open it. I touched the string. Read the card. F. I did not open it in the hospital. I did not open it for 2 weeks after I got home. The home nurse came twice a week. I slept a lot. I stared at the box on my kitchen table, the way you stare at something you're not ready to know yet, because I already suspected, in that place below conscious thought, who F was. And if I was right, if the person who had paid to keep me alive was the same person I'd spent 16 years believing had simply moved on, then the story of my own life was not what I had been told it was. During those 2 weeks, my mother called twice. Both voicemails sounded more inconvenienced than worried. She used the word dramatic in the second one. She wanted to know about Christmas. I didn't call back. I healed slowly. I thought about the gold watch. I thought about the porch swing. I thought about how I was 12 years old when I played the lead in my school's spring production of Annie, and my parents went to Brooke's soccer tournament instead, and my grandfather sat in the front row alone, and stood up when the curtain came down and clapped so loudly that people turned around to look. He brought me flowers afterward. He had me sign his program. I'll always come for you, sweetheart, he said. Always. And a week later, my father told me Grandpa Frank wasn't welcome at my school events anymore. He'd overstepped a boundary. I nodded, because I was 12, and my father was my father, and I didn't understand yet that I was being told a story designed to make me stop looking for the truth. On December 13th, at 11 o'clock at night, I sat down at my kitchen table and untied the brown twine. I lifted the lid. The gold watch was lying on a square of dark velvet. I recognized it the moment I saw it. The worn leather strap, the particular weight of it when I lifted it in my palm, the way the gold caught the lamplight. I turned it over. Engraved on the back in script I had to tilt toward the light to read. For Claire, who was never forgotten. Grandpa Frank, November 2022. November 2022. The month he died. My hand started shaking. Beneath the watch was a letter. 6 handwritten pages on cream stationery, dated the 4th of November 2022, 3 weeks before he passed. The penmanship was shaky, uneven, the handwriting of someone very sick pushing through pain to say what needed to be said before the time ran out. I read it 3 times without stopping, and I will tell you what it said. He wrote that my father had cut him out of my life when I was 13. That the argument happened behind closed doors, out of my sight. He had told my father that constantly measuring me against Brooke was hurting me, that making me feel like I could never be enough was damage dressed up as expectation. My father had told him to leave. He had said, "She is my daughter." My grandfather had said, "And she is my granddaughter." That was the last day he was welcome in our home. He never stopped. From that day forward, he wrote. He had sent cards for every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone. He had called. He had written letters on paper, the old-fashioned kind. Every single one had been returned unopened, stamped in red. His attorney, Daniel Reeves and Associates in Olympia, had the originals. All 41 of them. He had also hired a private investigation firm. Not to spy, he made that very clear, but to know that I was safe. They monitored public records only, police reports, hospital admissions, court filings in my area. If something serious happened, he would be notified. It was the only way left to him to be close. When I got into nursing school, he set up a trust, $65,000, structured to reach my school as a scholarship grant. My father had told me it was a family loan. I had been paying it back since I graduated. $450 per month. 54 months. $24,300, paid back on a debt that had never existed. He was leaving me everything. His house at 4 Hearthside Lane in Olympia. His savings and investments. The watch. The truth. He wrote that he was sorry 3 times, in different words, across different pages, that he hadn't fought harder to stay. That he had let a closed door keep him from the person he loved most. And at the very end, in handwriting shakier than what came before, as though it had cost him something to write it, he wrote, "I know you work nights in the pediatric ward. I know you stay with the children who have no one. I know you hold their hands in the dark and make sure they don't wake up alone. I have watched you, Claire. I know you. I always did. And you were never, ever, the problem. I want to stop here for a moment, because if you have ever been told, in ways that were never quite direct enough to argue with, that you were too much, too sensitive, too intense, too needy, too fragile, and you believed it, the way children believe the stories their families tell about them, because what other option is there? Then you know what it felt like to read those words. It is not a clean feeling. It is not simple relief. It is something more like the sensation of taking a breath after years of breathing shallowly without knowing it. Your whole chest opens at once, and it hurts, and it is the best kind of hurt there is. If you have ever been in a room where someone looked right through you, if you have ever brought your full self to a table and been told there wasn't room, I want you to hear this. That was never your fault. That was never about your worth. And somewhere, in ways you may not yet know, someone has seen you clearly and loved exactly what they saw. Below the letter was a USB drive, labeled in his handwriting. For Claire, the truth. I plugged it into my laptop and sat with a blanket pulled to my chest, and opened the first folder. 83 email threads my grandfather writing to my father, year after year after year, asking to see me, asking to send a gift, asking to be told how I was doing. The vast majority had no replies. The few that received responses came back in 2 or 3 words. She's busy. Don't contact us. I opened the second folder. Returned cards. 40. 1 scanned images of envelopes, all addressed to me at my parents' house, all stamped return to sender, all sealed shut. Birthday cards, Christmas cards. A card for the day I passed my nursing board exams, which meant he had been tracking me, keeping up, knowing even that. The third folder contained 4 audio recordings. I sat very still and played them one by one. His voice came through my laptop speakers. Warm, low, the voice I remembered from childhood. He left me a message on my 15th birthday, apologizing for not being able to take me out to lunch. He left one the day I was accepted to nursing school, his pride unmistakable and enormous. He left one when his diagnosis came in terminal pancreatic cancer, stage 4, telling me calmly what was happening, and where he was going. And then the 4th one. I won't transcribe it word for word, because I have played it enough times that I know what the pauses sound like, and I don't have the distance for it yet. What I will say is this. His voice in that final recording was weak and raspy, the voice of someone talking around pain and time running out. He told me he had tried to reach my father, had called and begged, literally begged, for permission to see me one last time before he died, just to say goodbye in person. My father had said I was too busy. He had talked about the second hand on the watch. He had told me he was sorry for not fighting harder. And at the very end of the recording, after a long cough, he said, "The second hand never stops. I want you to remember that. Not for a single moment. Neither has my love for you. Neither will it. Ever." And then the recording ended. I sat on my kitchen floor and played all 4 of them 3 times in a row. By the 3rd time, I was not crying. I was cold in the way that is not numbness but clarity cold. The way a clear night is cold. The way you can see every star when the atmosphere is still. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I called Daniel Reeves the next morning. He walked me through the estate, the probate filing from November 2022, the certified notification letters sent in January, March, and June of 2023, all to my parents' address, all signed for, none of which were ever forwarded to me. For 2 years, my parents had known I was the sole heir of a $1.1 million estate and had said nothing. The house on Hearthside Lane, appraised at $670,000. Investment and savings accounts, approximately $410,000. A life insurance policy, $100,000. Personal property including the watch. All of it, to me. My father had received nothing not by accident, but by design. By my grandfather's explicit, considered, witnessed, and notarized design. I didn't shake when I heard that. My hands were very steady. I want to take a moment to talk about my parents because I think it matters to understand them as people, not as villains. My father is a man who decided when I was 13 that his own father had undermined his authority, and he defended that decision the way proud people defend poor decisions. By never admitting it, by doubling down at every choice point, by building a narrative in which he was the reasonable one and everyone who questioned him was the problem. My mother followed, because she had built her life around his version of events, and to question it now would mean questioning 30 years of her own choices. They made themselves into people who couldn't respond to their daughter's crisis, not because they were incapable of love, but because they had spent so long telling themselves that my pain was exaggeration that they had lost the ability to recognize when I was genuinely in danger. That doesn't forgive it, but it explains it. And the explanation is important, because it means what happened to me was not a tragedy of monsters. It was a tragedy of ordinary people making small, selfish choices that compounded silently across decades until a doctor was calling from an ICU and my mother was thinking about dinner. That makes it worse, not better. But it is the truth. December 25th. I drove to Olympia on Christmas Day. Same highway, same gray sky, same exits. This time, I made it. The house was full, my parents, Brooke and her boyfriend, aunts and uncles and cousins. I hadn't seen in 2 years, 17 people with glasses of wine and half-eaten pie plates in the warm, distracted energy of a family holiday. I arrived at 4:30 p.m. I was wearing the watch. Brooke noticed it immediately. Is that Grandpa's? She said it the way you say something before you've decided how to feel about it. Yes, I said. He left it to me. She frowned. Dad said Grandpa didn't leave a will. Dad lied. The room went quiet. I had planned this. I had waited until the meal was over, until everyone had their coffee, until the room was full and warm and all 17 people were present and still. Then I put 3 things on the coffee table. The letter, a printed scan of one of the returned envelopes, my 18th birthday, my grandfather's handwriting, the red stamp, and a photograph of the trust document, my name at the top, my father's signature below it, acknowledging receipt of the scholarship funds on my behalf. I said, I want to share something. My grandfather wrote me a letter 3 weeks before he died. I'm going to read it. My mother stood up. Claire, this is not the time or place. I began reading. I want to tell you what it felt like in that room. Because when people imagine this kind of confrontation, they imagine rage or triumph or both. What I felt, standing in that living room with my grandfather's words in my hands and every face turned toward me, was grief. Deep, clean, irreversible grief. For the 16 years I had spent believing I had been forgotten by someone who had never, for a single day, stopped trying to reach me. For the 14-year-old girl who had lain in a hospital bed waiting to hear her parents apologize, and instead heard, "You should have been clearer." For every birthday I had spent quietly disappointed in myself, wondering what quality I lacked that would have made me worth choosing. I grieved all of it, right there, in that living room, while I read aloud, and my voice did not break once. I read the part about the birthday cards being returned. My aunt set down her wine glass. I read the part about the nursing school trust fund, about the fake loan, about $24,000 paid back over 4.5 years on a debt that never existed. Brooke said what a single syllable, barely audible in a voice that sounded like something falling. I read the part where my grandfather had called my father, sick and dying, to beg for permission to see me one last time, and been told I was too busy. My mother covered her mouth with one hand. My father did not move. His face was a wall. When I finished reading, I picked up my phone and connected it to the Bluetooth speaker on the shelf by the window. I pressed play on the final recording. 4 minutes and 23 seconds. Frank Harmon's voice, weak, raspy, full of love, filled the house that had once been full of him. The coughing, the pauses, the way he said my name. The second hand on that watch has never stopped. Not for a single moment. When the recording ended, the room was completely silent. The only sound was the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one I remembered from being small, still keeping time. I turned to my parents. I spoke slowly, because I wanted every word to land exactly where I meant it to. On November 27th, I was in emergency surgery. Doctor, Kelsey called you and told you I had blood in my chest and a collapsed lung. You said, call us if things get worse. You were notified of my inheritance in January 2023. You signed for 3 certified letters. For 2 years, you knew. And when I almost died on Thanksgiving, you didn't come. My father started to speak. I held up one hand. Daniel Reeves. His card is on the table. He has 83 emails, 41 returned cards, 4 recordings, a probate filing, and certified mail receipts with your signatures. All of it documented. All of it dated. If any of you want to understand what happened to my grandfather, to what our family could have been, call him. I looked at my parents for the last time. The house is mine. The money is mine. The watch is mine. I'm done. I walked to the front door. I didn't slam it. I closed it softly, gently, the way you close a door at the end of something, and I stood on the porch in the December cold for a moment, listening to the sound of the house behind me, voices rising, a chair scraping back, someone crying. I did not look back. I went to my car. I sat in the driver's seat. I looked down at my wrist and watched the second hand move in the pale light from the dashboard. Tick, tick, tick. I turned the key and I drove away. The fallout came quickly. Brooke called 3 days later. I let her leave a voicemail. She said she didn't know. She said she was sorry. She said she'd donated money to the scholarship fund in Grandpa's name when she read about it in the paper, and that she wanted to do better. I haven't called back yet. I will. I need more time. My father sent an email with the subject line, "We need to talk." It blamed my grandfather's mental state, called the will the act of a confused old man. He accused me of humiliating the family in front of witnesses. I read it once and deleted it. My mother texted from a number I didn't recognize to say my father was having chest pains from the stress. I blocked the number. My aunt and 2 of my cousins reached out separately to say they had no idea. I believe them. Most people in a family story like this don't know. They've just been living inside someone else's version of events for so long they stopped checking if the windows matched the walls. On January 8th, I moved into my grandfather's house at 4 Hearthside Lane. 3 bedrooms, a sunroom overlooking a small garden, the kitchen smelling faintly of cedar and old books. His bookshelves were still full. His coffee mug was still in the drying rack. There was a photograph on the mantel, Frank Harmon and my grandmother, young, standing in front of a Christmas tree, laughing at something out of frame. She died before I was old enough to hold memories of her. He had kept that photo for 30 years. I stood in his living room and looked at it for a long time, and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 8 years old, sitting in this same house, holding this same watch. Safe. Here is what nobody tells you about discovering you were loved the whole time. It doesn't feel like relief. Not at first. It feels like standing in a room you've lived in for years and realizing, slowly, that every wall you thought was solid was actually a door painted shut, locked from the outside, by someone who needed you to believe there was nowhere else to go. The relief comes later. What comes first is a very specific kind of rage, not at the person who loved you in secret. At the years, at the ordinary Tuesdays and unremarkable Thursdays when you sat alone with your quiet sense of not enoughness and believed, because you had no evidence to the contrary, that it was simply the truth about you. I think about that a lot now. How much of what we accept about ourselves was handed to us by people who needed us small. Here is the thing I keep coming back to, months later, sitting in my grandfather's house with his books on the shelves and his photograph on the mantel. He could not fix what my father broke. He couldn't undo the birthdays or return the years or sit across from me at a table and watch me grow up. Love at a distance, no matter how faithful and consistent and enormous, cannot replace presence. It just can't. And I think my grandfather knew that. I think that knowledge was the thing that cracked his voice on that final recording. More than the cancer, more than the pain. He knew what he was giving me would never fully make up for what was taken. But he did it anyway. And I think that's the part that matters most. Not the inheritance. Not the house or the watch or the accounts. The part that matters is that he woke up every day for 16 years knowing I couldn't hear him, and he kept talking. He kept writing. He kept recording. He kept building the system, keeping the file, making sure that if there was ever a crack in the wall, there would be something on the other side of it waiting for me. That is not a lesson about family. That is a lesson about what love actually does when it runs out of easy options. Most of us, when we're pushed away by someone we love, eventually stop pushing back. And sometimes that's true. But sometimes, if I'm being completely honest with myself about the people in my own life I've quietly given up on, sometimes it's just easier to stop. To let the silence mean whatever the other person needs it to mean. To protect yourself from the door being closed in your face one more time. My grandfather didn't do that. For 16 years. With 41 cards and 83 emails and 4 voicemails into what he must have suspected was a void. I don't know if I'm capable of that kind of love. I genuinely don't know. But I want to be. There's one question I've been sitting with since December, and I want to leave it with you too, because I don't think I'm the only one who needs to ask it. Think of someone in your life who has gone quiet. Someone who used to reach out and slowly stopped. Someone whose absence you've explained away with the most comfortable version of the story. Is it possible, not certain? Just possible that they stopped, not because they stopped caring, but because every door they knocked on stayed closed? I'm not saying you owe anyone access to your life. I'm not saying every estrangement is the wrong person's fault. But I am saying, sometimes the person who goes silent isn't the one who gave up. Sometimes they just ran out of ways to stay. That question cost me something when I first asked it about myself. It might cost you something too. If this story reached something in you, I want to know exactly what. Not a number, not a poll. Tell me in the comments the one sentence that stopped you. The line that made you pause and reread. The moment that felt like it was about your life and not just hers. I read every comment, not because it's the polite thing to say, but because the comment section of a video like this is where I learn whether I told the story right, whether I found the thing that was actually true, underneath all the plot. And I want to know where you are right now, not just your city, but where you are. Are you watching this at the end of a shift? On a break you're not supposed to be taking? In the dark because you can't sleep? That context matters to me. You are not an anonymous view count. You are a specific person in a specific moment, and this story found you for some reason. If you want to stay, if you want to be here for the next one, subscribe. Not because the algorithm needs it, though it does, but because the next story is already half written, and it is about someone who spent 20 years being the strong one in every room, and what happened the one time they finally weren't. And I think you'll want to hear it. The second hand never stops. Neither do I.